Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 42. Loki gets his throne. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me, as always, is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in Loki, Season 2, Episode 6, which was the finale of this season. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, too. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. What's going on in your writing world?
Writing world, let's see, still kind of going slowly as I'm trying to figure out marketing plan. I took a couple of online courses and did some research on Amazon ads, and I've set those up. So I've got Amazon ads going for my first book, the Zara story, and I've set that up, and then I'll be tweaking that over time. And other than that, just doing Vela promotion still as well. That's about it. Nothing too exciting right at the moment. How about you?
I'm now 75% of the way through on the second book in my space opera science fiction series, The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. The second book is called Ecliptic, and yeah, so it's only another 25% to write, so I'm excited about that. And I have finished the audio chapter editing for the third book in my time travel series. That series is called the Temporal Protection Core series. And so that full audiobook for that third book is now available on YouTube. So the next step is going to be compiling all those chapters into one long video that people can listen to on YouTube. And that takes a little time, so I will probably do that maybe over the weekend coming up. And then jump into book 4.
That's excellent.
Thank you. Book 4 is actually longer than the other books in the series, so that's going to take some time. Hopefully I'll have that finished before the end of the year, but we'll see what happens.
So it's longer based on an outline, or you have a quick draft, or?
Well, it's a published book. So
it's a published book.
Yeah.
Or you're doing the audio for it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The audio chapters of the time travel series. Book 4 in the time travel series is much longer than the other books. So, because I see what you're saying. I was trying to wrap up a whole bunch of threads because it's the end of the series.
Yeah.
See, at the end of book 3, I left one of the characters in the clutches of the bad guys. And I expected that book to be the last in the series, and then I realized I didn't want to leave this character in the bad guys' clutches. So I wrote a whole other book to get him out of the bad guys' clutches.
That's great. It's nice to have a good, juicy wrap-up, though.
Yeah, and it's juicy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in it. I really enjoyed writing it. I hope people enjoy reading it. And I'm looking forward to editing the audio chapters and getting them on YouTube for folks to listen to. And then I have a standalone story in that universe, too, that I'm kind of going back and forth about whether to do an audiobook for it or not. It doesn't have the same characters. It's the origin story, sort of the universe, and the villain, kind of the villain's origin story too. And so if people are really invested in the characters in the 4-book series, they are not going to find those characters in this standalone story. So I'm still kind of thinking about whether I should do the audiobook for that, or maybe make that something available just for Patreon folks, who are really into the universe and want to know more, want to dig into that origin story, maybe have that origin story only available on Patreon and have the audio version only available on Patreon. I'm kind of going back and forth about that. What do you think?
That's a good question. My initial thought is to, make it available, but putting it as a special thing for your followers might be good too.
Yeah. See? It's easy to see both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe start off with it just for your Patreon followers, and then, after some time you make it available.
Yep, that's a good idea too. Best of both worlds. And as a reminder to our listeners, they can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard on Patreon. They can listen to the Temporal Protection Course series on YouTube, and you can read The Golden Scare of Balihar, which is the first book in the Tales of Zara, both on Kindle Vella and as a Kindle ebook, and paperback now too, yes?
Yeah, paperback on Amazon, or you can order it from pretty much everywhere else.
Awesome. And we will put the links to all of those in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books or movies or TV?
Let's see. I was watching The Morning Show. Have you seen that on Apple TV Plus?
No.
It's not in our science fiction or fantasy or horror kind of wheelhouse. It's a drama set in a newsroom about these characters who are on this morning show, and it's sort of a take on what was going on with the Me Too movement. One of the characters is accused of assault and is fired, and that triggers a whole chain of events about looking into the company culture and all of that. Yeah, it's a good show, very dramatic. Stars Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon. They both do great jobs, and it builds up to a really strong emotional climax in the first season. Yeah, it was a good show. If you can deal with that topic, I should say. What about you? Have you seen or read anything cool recently?
Well, I've actually started a new book in anticipation of our an interview that you and I are going to do here on the podcast. And the book is called The Blood Strain Agenda, The Journal of the Sacrificial Scientist, Volume 1, by J.L. Birchwood. And you and I are going to be interviewing J.L. Birchwood here in a couple of weeks. And so I wanted to have the book read by the time of the interview. So I've started that book. It's interesting. It's intense. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, me too.
Are you ready to talk about Loki?
I am.
All right, let's begin. Today we're talking about a story told in Loki Season 2, Episode 6, Glorious Purpose. And I will read the very short summary that comes up when you type in Loki Season 2, Episode 6. Loki learns the true nature of glorious purpose as he rectifies the past to save the future. Did you like this episode?
Yes, I did like this episode. For me, it was almost like 2 episodes. There was the first part, which we get the sort of now familiar time loop type of story. And that has this sort of humor from the series that we've come to expect. And it's kind of a fun replay of events as Loki tries to solve this problem, going back again and again through time. I like those. I tend to like those kind of stories, even though they tend to be very similar. But I thought they did it well here. And then there's a more serious latter part of the story. In the first part, there's some great lines, some funny lines that they just throw out and move on. Like, this is the TVA handbook. You both wrote it. Isn't that amazing? And then he just moves on, just cutting through the story really quick. Or it looks like Mobius, but it's actually Victor Timely regarding the little character that he made. Just great callbacks to previous episodes. I thought those were really funny. And there's a few other lines like that in this first part, which I really enjoyed. And then the story kind of changes, right? It becomes more serious in tone as we push toward the finale. And what we get at the end, ultimately, for me, was surprising. The end of where they went with the story. I feel like I should have seen the setup for where they were going, but I missed it. And that's great. That's what you want in your story, right? You don't want people to say, "Oh, here's how it's going to end," and just know from the beginning. But you want enough seeds planted so that by the time you get to there at the end of the story, it's like, "Oh, right. That's why they set it up like this in the beginning," and it all kind of makes sense and comes back to where it kind of is like a circle, right? And I thought they did that well. It's, you get to the end and it seems like an obvious conclusion, but it's surprising when you get it. Yeah, the end was very different in tone. It ends on a very weighty, heavy finale, right? With Loki basically sacrificing himself for the good of the multiverse, which is like a very huge concept. What this character becomes. He claims a throne. It's just not the one that he or anyone else expected. And it was very big, very epic. I have some other thoughts, some, under the what you might improve section, but we'll get to that. Overall, I liked it. So yeah, but I'm curious to see what you thought of it.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on one thing. It's because I don't think Loki sacrificed himself for the multiverse. He sacrificed himself for his friends.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point.
That's what I took away from it. It was all about Mobius and Casey and Obi and Sylvie. I don't think had it been the multiverse that he would have done it. And I think that goes to the character of Loki. Loki's not about being the great hero that Thor is throughout all the 9 realms, right? He's about himself and has always been about himself, and himself did not want to lose these people that he had grown to care about. And so the fact that he ended up saving the multiverse was, a bonus, but I'm not sure that was what was driving him. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it became about that, right? I think it started with him realizing he cares about his friends, right? These people. But I think it expanded beyond that to realize he can learn to care in general, right? Because he could have just kept the sacred timeline and his friends would have been fine. But he went beyond that, expanded even more and said, you know what? Everybody deserves this chance. And he was the only one who could give it to them.
And yes. I think you're right. And I think, yeah. And that actually does fit the whole arc. We have this character who Loki wants a throne. And he wants to be, knelt in front of, right? When we see him in the first Avengers, he's like, kneel, and isn't this your place? You want to be kneeling before someone in charge. And then when he in Ragnarok and he comes with the ship and he's like, your savior is here, right? He wants to be the hero, but he doesn't want to make the sacrifices necessary. The sacrificing of his own comfort, his own resources. He doesn't want to do that. And then at the end here, he becomes a hero by sacrificing himself. But the primary driver is this small reward instead of the big reward.
Yeah, that's man, those are good points. Because you're right. Originally, it was all about him, right? Like that's who his character was. Worship me. I deserve this. I should be the king, the god, whatever. Bow down to me. And then at the end, where do we see him? He does this totally selfless act, and nobody will even know about it, right? Other than the handful of people who knew what he did. He saved the multiverse, gave everyone a chance at life, and completely thankless. Like no one will ever know. Yeah, that's a huge, huge change in his character. I thought they did that well.
Yeah, I agree. So other things that I liked about it, it was intense from the very beginning. Even from like the backwards Marvel logo piece right at the very beginning. And I also wondered if the music was backwards. I couldn't really tell if it was just new music that was created or the Loki music that was, composed backwards now. or what, but it was like right from the very beginning, it set a very intense tone.
Ooh,
Running
that's a
like, the
yeah, that's a good point. I didn't
yeah.
catch that. I will say I almost always just skip the opening sequence, but something this time made me watch it all the way through. It was like, I don't know, because it was different, it caught my attention. I was like, oh, where's this going with this? But yeah, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe they did reversed it or something like that. That's a good catch.
Yeah. And I think your point of how it almost felt like two episodes, because you have the first part where the time looping is and he's trying to figure out how to fix things by becoming an expert in physics and all of the, things that you need to become an expert in to be able to find out a mechanical solution, because that's what they were looking for, was a mechanical solution to this problem. I thought that was a lot of fun. And then all of a sudden it switches gears and it becomes this incredibly interesting philosophical debate with He Who Remains. And they lead you to believe that it's actually going to come down to a decision whether to save Sylvie or not.
Right.
But that's not where it ended up going. So that was sort of like a fake. And then sending it off into a different direction, which I thought was really fascinating. And then again, like you said, the end was epic in scope, with Loki making this sacrifice and doing so in a way that was clearly difficult and requiring a lot of his energy, a lot of his focus, a lot of himself. And I love that he got a throne in what is it, the Dark World. Odin says to him, all this because Loki desires a throne. Well, Loki got his throne.
Yes.
Really, really interesting episode. Definitely. And as we've noticed, they raised the stakes every single episode this season, and they did the same thing again here. The stakes were raised higher than they were ever done before, and I thought that was really well done. I also really loved that when he finally got his throne and he's got all these time threads. He's essentially the loom. He has become the loom. He's sitting on his throne, controlling the time threads. And the structure that he creates looks like Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil, that's it. That we see in the original in the original Captain America movie, when the Red Skull goes to Norway to find the Tesseract. It's hidden behind a wall panel depicting the world tree, Yggdrasil. And then we hear about that again in Thor, about how the 9 realms could be construed as being part connected by this tree. And then we see this again with Loki.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't even catch that. That's good.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting is that Loki's magic is green. And the time stone was green. I don't know if that was purposeful or not. But I thought, I wonder if we're going to see a return of the time stone now for, like with Doctor Strange. Because Loki now has control of time with his magic. I don't know. It could be a coincidence.
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
I mean, the Marvel folks are known for like planning way ahead. Though
Yeah.
Not recently, but maybe this was planned. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you would have done differently in this episode?
There's some small things. The one thing that I thought coming into, like, as it neared the climax, when Loki sort of goes through whatever portal thing that he went through, this is something we've mentioned before in the series. I think someone saying something about what he was actually doing could have helped in that moment.
Yes.
I was like, what is going on? Like, I didn't really get it until the end. I was like, I think this is what's happening, but I'm not sure. And then at the end, it's like, okay, I even still, I'm like, I think I understand what's happening. But like some line, just giving us one sentence of explanation.
I agree.
Just to make it clear what's going on.
Sylvie said he's
nice.
saving us. So she understood what was happening.
Right.
She could have had that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, exactly. Because I like where they went with it. It just, clarity sometimes is good. Especially when there's so much going on throughout the series. every once in a while it's nice to like have a grounding, right, of where we are and what we're seeing. I mean, I guess we've kind of figured it out right at the end, but just that explanation I think would have been nice, just some little bit there.
I agree.
This isn't a thing that I would improve. It's another thing I thought was kind of funny was here they are trying to like salvage the loom, right, and make this thing work, when all along like it was acting as a failsafe where if everything goes awry, boom, it just blows up all the other timelines and just preserves the sacred timeline. I thought that was funny, and a good reveal, and it shows like how far ahead He Who Remains was from all of them, right? Even Loki coming back, it's like he knew this was going to happen. He knew he was going to do the time slipping thing. He knew he was going to eventually figure it out. He knew they were going to have the discussion at the end. He may not have known exactly what it was going to be, but he knew like they were going to get to this point at some point. I thought that was really cool. What would you improve?
You know, I was actually left with a lot of unanswered questions. Why did Loki start time slipping in the first place? I don't think we ever got an answer to that. Sylvie pushed him through a portal, and the next thing you know, he's time slipping. Why? Was it because He Who Remains constructed that? You know, like somehow made that possible? If so, I don't recall hearing that.
This happened.
Or learning that.
Yeah, I think this is another thing where a line of explanation could have helped that. I think we were supposed to get something from like, okay, because that event happened at the same time it exploded, he became like unconnected in time or something. I don't know, but you're right. That would have been nice to have an explanation for.
Yeah. Because why didn't anybody else time slip then? I mean, Sylvie clearly left He Who Remains castle after she killed him. Why wasn't she time slipping? So I was just confused by that. I actually found the conversation between Loki and He Who Remains confusing. I was trying to figure out what is he saying here, and I didn't get it. And I guess what he was saying was that either I run the TVA or you run the TVA. Somebody's got to run it. I would have liked to have seen something more of Renslayer than just the sort of the last scene of her waking up at the end of time after having been pruned. She was such a formidable character in so many ways, and then she was just sort of, I don't know, she just sort of disappeared, which I thought to me was a little frustrating. She was He Who Remains like lieutenant during the war that he refers to. I would think that she would have bring more power to bear rather than just to wake up at the end of time, facing Eliath, and that's the end of her, which I don't think it is. And I would have liked to have seen something more. I would have liked to have seen her come back and throw some kind of wrench in the works as Loki's trying to fix things, and have that additional layer of intensity going on there, because she was such a powerful character. What happened to He Who Remains? If Loki takes over and is now the Loom, where's He Who Remains? What does that mean for him? And I don't think we got any explanation of that, but maybe I missed it.
Well, they said, it was like one quick line toward the end, where they said they were pruning the different versions of him. Presumably to keep the multiversal war from even happening, so that there didn't have to be a He Who Remains at the end, right? There didn't have to be one of them rising to control everything, because they were just going to keep them from getting to that point in the first place. That was my thought on it.
But time, as it's described in this show, is not linear. And so he already exists at the end of time. He existed at the end of time. Unless by Loki doing what he didn't change the fact that Sylvie killed him, which I guess is what happened. So the fact that Sylvie was there when he became the Loki Loom suggests that she still killed him. So maybe that's the answer to my question.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the problem with time travel stories, right? Inevitably, there's something that's like doesn't quite wrap up because the paradox.
Right.
I think that's why they left it a bit vague and timey-wimey kind of thing. But you're right. Again, I mean, this goes back to sort of a little bit more explanation, right? It's like, because I did feel this sort of unease at the end of the episode, like same thing. Like I wanted more explanation for the wrap up. And I very much agree with you about the Renslayer. That's one point I wanted to bring up, which I had forgotten about, was like they set her up in, I forget which episode now, one of the episodes when we see like her backstory briefly. It's almost like she's like a partner with He Who Remains, right? And then she just kind of disappears throughout this episode, and we just see they're like at the end they're like, oh shoot, we forgot about this character. Well, let's just throw her at the end of the time. Okay. Yeah, I feel like there should have been more, but you're right. Maybe there's going to be more with her character in movies or in other shows or something. I haven't read these comics, so that last scene might be a setup for something to come.
And actually, that's a really good point, because as I understand it, the actor who plays He Who Remains is having some legal difficulties right now, and so it may be that Marvel takes a different tack, because Marvel and Disney are not real crazy about their actors having public relations issues.
Yeah, for sure.
So that may be, and
I
you know
also
what?
wonder how it affects.
I was going to say she would make a great villain.
Yeah, they set up a good character there.
Yeah.
So this is Kang, right? From the movie, from the Ant-Man movie?
Yes.
Same guy?
I believe so.
Yeah, so I could wonder how it relates to that, because at the end of, did you see that? Did you see
did.
Ant-Man?
Quantumania?
Whatever it was, Quantumania?
Yes.
Yeah, so Quantumania, I mean, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen that. We're going to talk about that for just a minute here. At the end of that, right, there's the whole multiverse of Kangs, presumably unleashed now to do whatever havoc they want to do. Like, how does that work with this? It seems like this kind of undoes that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like those Kangs are just going to get pruned out of existence. So it seems like they have a conflict now between their TV show and their movie series.
But they're not pruned out of existence. And that's the next point I wanted to make. They go to the end of time. So they're still there. And maybe they could all band together.
True.
So, or maybe, this would be cool. Maybe there will be like a war at the end of time with all the Lokis that got pruned and all the Kangs that got pruned there at the end of time. That'd be kind of fun. Because that was the other thing. I was like, what about the other Lokis that were all pruned and there at the end of time? And we did kind of sort of get the answer to the question, why are all the Lokis being pruned? Because He Who Remains wanted one of them to step up and take over for him.
Right, that's true.
And he saw that potential in the Lokis. I think I don't think that was ever said. I'm just sort of going with that.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing that brings up is we see Renslayer there at the end of time. You could look at it as, oh well, now she's going to be killed by this beast, or there could be multiple. He Who Remains is there, multiple Kangs there, multiple Lokis there that could save her. There's like now you have a group of very knowledgeable, powerful, intelligent people or beings all at the end of time who can probably do whatever they want.
So that could make for also some interesting stories in the future.
Yeah.
So as a writer, what is your takeaway from this episode?
I think the big thing for me is don't do the expected. It's like, I said, I should have seen where this is going, right? We start off the series where, and they even did the flashback in the recap at the beginning of this episode of, you just want the throne, you just want to be king, right? And I was like, at the time I'm watching this show, I'm not really thinking, okay, that's super significant. that's really where they're going to go with this. It was just kind of like, okay, we're seeing where Loki's character was, and we're going to transition him into this show. But that was hugely important. Right, he became sort of the king of time or the multiverse or whatever, or at least the timekeeper at the end, and he had his throne, but he only got it by being completely the opposite of who he was. Instead of being this very selfish character, he became this very selfless character. And for me, at least, that I wasn't expecting that. Although, again, that's where they were leading his character throughout the show. I should have seen like the ultimate culmination of that is this, but it didn't. It didn't register in my mind. So they got me. So yeah, don't do the unexpected. You want an end where it's. I forget who initially said this, but I heard Sean Coyne say this a lot. The end should be inevitable but surprising, and I think they did that really well.
Yeah, I agree.
What is your takeaway?
My takeaway is to kind of just, I think, fill in the blanks. If you intend to fill in the blanks, and that's a big question. We don't know if there's going to be a Loki season 3. Right now, as far as I know, there isn't one planned. And this episode certainly wrapped it up in such a way that they could walk away from the series and it would be wrapped up. But as we talked about, some dialogue here and there just to wrap up these threads a little bit more neatly would have been really helpful. So I think for me, that's what I want to do. Make sure the things that you mean to wrap up are clearly wrapped up.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the season as a whole. What do you think of season 2 overall?
I loved it. I thought it was really well done. There were some couple patchy spots in there where we weren't really sure where it was going. I almost feel like I would like to go back and watch again, because I remember some of the early episodes we had questions and we're like, I wonder if they're going to answer this later on. I don't remember what those questions were right off the top of my head, but if I went back, maybe it's like, oh, they did answer this, or no, they just kind of ignored that and moved on. It'd be interesting to see that. But overall, I thought it was faithful to the first season, very similar in style and tone, and with this constant increasing of stakes. So I thought they did that really well. I thought they gave us a good character development path for Loki and taking him from his selfish person to a selfless person at the end. And it wasn't like, oh, we see that in 1 or 2 episodes, right? It wasn't like this immediate flip. We see it over time. It's like, oh, okay, he's working against the TVA and he's working against Mobius. And then slowly it's like they start working in concert and then they become friends. And then he's concerned for them and then he's trying to save them. And then he realizes, wow, there's these other people out there. There's whole other universes out there too that didn't have a chance. He starts to get, some connection to other people, other beings, and that pushes his transition. I thought they did that really well. I think if you look at it from that perspective, the character arc that they were trying to do, and that being the theme of the show from between these 2 seasons, I think they did it well. I feel like this probably is the wrap-up for the Loki series. It certainly seems like an epic conclusion, and they've taken things with his character about as far as they could go. I'm not sure what they would do now that would be a good positive transition off of where they left him. Something larger that he would have to learn seems like it would be tough to find. I feel like more like anything left open that was left intentionally open is probably more for setup for other shows or movies to come. Like we talked about the Renslayer character. Maybe that's someone who appears again later. But I thought they did it pretty well. I guess I felt a little bit lacking toward the end in terms of the other characters. But they kind of tried to wrap them up. It wasn't necessarily about them so much, right? It was Loki's show. So I forgive that a bit. And I guess on the, what you can improve series-wise or season-wise, I think it's just a accumulation of things that we've talked about, most of which are being focused more on clarity at times, and so that people know what's going on in the moment. And, as you said in this episode, know where things, how they were actually wrapped up, what the loose end, how the loose ends were handled and that kind of thing. But overall, I like this show. I like the fact that it's different from the movies and that we didn't just get the same Loki character throughout this series that we saw in the movies. I think that would have been simple and cheap and ultimately unfulfilling. So I think they took it in the right direction. Anyway, I'm rambling enough. What are your thoughts on the season and the series as a whole?
Well, I too really enjoyed it. I thought it was high quality entertainment and fairly consistently high quality entertainment. And even like you said, where there's some patchy places, the still overall quality of each episode was it was really good. It was really amazing. My takeaway of this particular season was kind of actually a little bit of a branch off from something you just said, which was how towards the end, we didn't have so much focus on the other characters. And I remember at the beginning of this season, you said something about how this show seemed to focus more on Sylvie than the Loki that we had been following throughout the entire Marvel universe. And I was thinking how cleverly done it was to have these episodes focus on the character that we most sympathized with and have that evolve through the course of the season. So at the beginning of the season, when we had Loki that we didn't really like that much, and it was focused on Sylvie, and then all of a sudden that we're starting to like Loki more and more because he's growing, he's evolving and developing, the focus shifts to him and less on Sylvie. And I thought that was really well done, but still kept us as the audience taking this journey with someone we liked. I thought that was good.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Any other thoughts on Loki season 2?
I assume if anyone's listening to this, if they haven't seen it, we just told you the whole story now. But it's still worth checking out. Like you said, I think each episode is well done. And they clearly had a plan for the series and for the character and where they were going. And that's good to see. I think the writing, by and large, was very good throughout the series. And yeah, I hope they continue to do quality shows like this and to take chances on different things like this. What about you? Final thoughts?
Good stuff. Watch it again. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Loki, Season 2, Episode 6, Glorious Purpose. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing and following wherever you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the first of 3 special 60th anniversary specials of Doctor Who, The Star Beast. Thank you so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I agree. It was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.